Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, sat up in your familiar room, and quietly realized you're living alone, truly alone? No more soft voice from a spouse calling your name. No little footsteps or giggles echoing through the house. Just the ticking of a clock, the whisper of wind outside the window, and a silence that seems to stretch on forever. That feeling, it's hard to name because it's not a sharp sadness. It's more like a quiet emptiness that slowly settles in through the years. Through lonely meals with one empty seat, through holidays marked by a brief phone call instead of a warm embrace. If you've ever quietly wondered to yourself, how will I manage if I get sick one day? Who would even know if I disappeared for a while? Will I become a burden to my children? Then please don't feel ashamed, because many older adults in America, just like you, are quietly living with the same questions. And just like you, they're still searching for a way to carry on gently, without despair. Believe me when I say this, even if no one is by your side every day, you can still live safely, with joy, and with someone to talk to. The answer isn't something big or dramatic. Often, all it takes is a few small adjustments, a few practical preparations, and a little courage to open your heart again, and suddenly, growing older doesn't feel so lonely anymore. And if you've been quietly nodding along to these words, I invite you to stay with me just a few moments longer, because I'd like to share with you a few small things, simple, but warm enough to bring comfort to your heart in a season of life that feels cold. There comes a quiet moment in life that no one warns us about. You wake up one winter morning, and the house feels unusually silent. You look around and gently ask yourself, have I prepared enough for a tomorrow where no one calls? No one stops by for a moment when a sudden spell of dizziness might come, or when I simply feel deeply alone. Old age doesn't always knock loudly when it arrives. It comes softly through slower footsteps, through a shift in how others look at you with concern instead of anticipation. And in that stillness, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. I need a plan. Not to be a burden, but also not to be forgotten. No one wants to imagine themselves growing weaker. But if that day comes, do you know who you call first? Do you know where your medical records are? Can you still remember the name of your last doctor? And if something happens in the middle of the night, does your bedroom phone have anyone on speed dial besides your children? Perhaps you've never had to think about these things before. In our younger years, we lived in control. We managed. But at some point, we learned being in control at this age isn't about doing everything, but about preparing well enough so that when the unexpected happens, our hearts can remain calm, not panicked. And remember, preparing for yourself doesn't mean expecting the worst. It means respecting yourself. It's a quiet act of dignity. You don't need a big house. You don't need a lot of money. You just need enough to cover your medicine, your living costs, a proper meal each day. Enough to know that if you ever need assistance, you won't have to depend completely on someone else. Older adults in America are often seen as fiercely independent, but sometimes that very independence makes us forget we also have the right to feel vulnerable, the right to prepare for the things no one likes to talk about. No one lives forever, but we all hope that when the time comes, we'll still have some say in how we live it. And perhaps you'd agree with me. Living alone isn't the hard part. It's not knowing what could happen when you're all alone that truly weighs on the heart. A small notebook with important contacts, a cabinet with clearly labeled medicine, a trusted neighbor who knows you live alone and would notice if your front door stays closed for too long. These aren't just little things, they are quiet walls of protection when no one else is close enough to come quickly. I've met many elders who say, I live simply, I don't need much, and I understand that. But living simply doesn't mean living carelessly. You may not need much, but the few things you do need should be in order. So if you woke up this morning with even the slightest unease, give yourself a bit of time today. Write down what matters. Look through your medicine cabinet. Talk to a trusted friend. Call your kids not to ask for anything, but to tell them you're starting to prepare. And if you've already taken that step, I invite you to leave a few words in the comments below, because maybe someone else watching this right now, just needs a small reminder like yours to begin. When you have a clear plan for yourself, growing older won't feel so frightening. In fact, you might begin to see it as a season of life where you get to live more honestly, more slowly and more on your own terms than ever before. And when your mind feels settled, when your heart feels steady, that may be the moment you feel ready to step outside again. Not to chase the world, but to reconnect with it. Because at any age, life still calls us to be seen and to belong, and we'll talk more about that next. There are times when loneliness doesn't come from being abandoned, but from the quiet decision to slowly close the door of our heart, bit by bit, as the years go by. I believe you know that feeling. When your children have built lives of their own, when your spouse is no longer here, and the friends who once filled your days have slowly faded from your contact list. The outside world starts to feel unfamiliar, not because it's changed, but because we stop stepping into it. Many people grow quiet after retirement. At first, it's just skipping a few plans. But then, day after day, we stay in the house, the TV on in the background, just to fill the silence. Yet somehow the silence inside us still wins. That kind of stillness can feel soft at first, but left too long, it seeps in. And before we know it, we've forgotten what it's like to have someone truly meet our gaze and listen. We forget the quiet joy of hearing someone say our name, of being asked how we're doing, as if we still matter in their world. And you know, being seen, really seen, is something every person needs, at every age. So if you're still able to walk, even slowly, try stepping outside. Not far, not with a big goal in mind, just enough to be somewhere with sunlight, with people passing by, with the sounds of life continuing. Maybe it's a park nearby, where other seniors linger after morning stretches. Maybe it's the local community center, where a warm cup of tea and a quiet board game are always waiting. Or maybe just a small grocery store, where the cashier still remembers your name and smiles each week. Connection doesn't have to start with long conversations. Sometimes a nod is enough, a soft smile, a gentle hello, just something to remind you, you are still here. You are still part of this world. Don't let the fear of being left behind be the reason you leave yourself out. Don't let the thought that everyone is busy convince you that you no longer have something to offer. Old age isn't a time to step back. It's a time to stand firm quietly in the flow of life. You don't have to be loud. You don't need to stand out. You just need to be there and stay open. And if one day someone happens to start a conversation, let your heart receive it. You don't need to know where it's going. You only need to know this. You didn't shut yourself off, because when you give the world a chance to reach you, you may also be giving yourself a chance to feel truly alive again. If you've been living alone, and you've had those days when the only voice you heard came from the TV, I invite you to share something below. Tell us what helped you move through that silence. Maybe your story will find its way to someone else, someone who's listening quietly now, and give them just enough hope for tomorrow. And when we begin to open our hearts again, when these small encounters start to return to our daily life, we might begin to wonder, could someone even now become a gentle companion, not to fill the emptiness, but simply and to walk beside us through these long afternoons? We'll talk about that in the next part. There are certain empty spaces in life that memories can't quite fill, and distant words of comfort just can't reach. I believe many of us have felt that. When the person you shared your life with is gone, when your children are busy with their own families, and when each meal comes with just one plate and one empty chair across the table, you get used to it. You even learn to manage living alone. But still, every now and then, a quiet sadness creeps in right before the day ends, and the night arrives too soon. We're not looking to replace those we've lost. Memories are sacred, and no one should try to take their place. But that doesn't mean the rest of life has to be lived in silence, as if we're just the leftover half of something that used to be whole. As we grow older, our connections naturally become fewer. But if your heart can still feel the warmth of a sigh, If your eyes still recognize the quiet presence of someone nearby, then that means you still carry within you the gentle ability to love not with fireworks, but with quiet strength. A companion at this stage of life doesn't have to be a romantic partner. No flower, no promises. Sometimes, it's simply someone who's willing to share the silence of an autumn afternoon, to make a cup of tea together, to lay out a simple dinner, and sit by the window, watching the world move by. Because no matter our age, we all need the presence of someone, not to save us, not to fix us, just to sit beside us in the moments that feel like there's nothing left to wait for. And if your heart has been closed off for a while, afraid of being hurt again, maybe it's time to look at things differently. Opening up doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means accepting the present and giving yourself a chance to live more fully in the time you have now. Old age was never meant to be a solitary journey, and love doesn't only come from blood ties. Sometimes, a friend close in age, close in spirit, can bring a warmth that's quietly real. Nothing flashy, nothing rushed, just honest companionship. You might think, I've grown used to living on my own. Or, at this point in life, why begin again? And I understand, but maybe we're not beginning again. Maybe we're simply continuing with someone new, in a different season of life. Companionship now doesn't need to be marriage, or even commitment. Sometimes it's just having someone who asks, "Did you sleep well last night?" or "Want to take a short walk this evening?" And if one day you're feeling tired, and they know to pour you a warm drink, then sit quietly beside you, saying nothing at all. That alone can be a priceless kind of care. A support that needs no words but carries you through those moments of quiet struggle you once shouldered alone. If you're living by yourself now, but feel even a small longing for a companion who moves at your pace, I invite you to share something in the comments below. You might discover that you're not alone, that many others from your generation are searching for the same quiet connection. One that feels just right, just enough. And as we grow brave enough to open up, we also begin to realize something else, that there may not always be someone by our side to care for us when our health declines. And that's why we need to start thinking about safer, more stable living environments for the years ahead. That's what we'll gently talk about in the next part. Sometimes, the home that once felt warm and full starts to feel too big, and the quiet you once dreamed of becomes something that makes you feel a little lost. Have you ever felt that way? You wake up in the morning and no one is sitting across the breakfast table. You go to the store and buy just enough food for one. At night, you make your bed, lock the doors, and lie down, with a feeling that isn't quite sadness, but more like a quiet, heavy emptiness. At a certain age, living alone in the house that used to be your safe haven can become more challenging. Not just because the bed feels colder, but because the small daily tasks like cooking, cleaning, or taking out the trash start to feel heavier, more exhausting. And then, a quiet question begins to form in your mind. Is it time for something different? I know many older adults hesitate to consider that. Leaving the place you've lived in for decades is no small decision. Every corner of the house holds memories. Each worn chair feels familiar. And deep down, many of us still say, I can manage on my own. But maybe the question isn't really about ability. Maybe it's about safety. Maybe it's about comfort. And about how gently we want to live the years we still have. Choosing a senior living community isn't giving up. It's not a step backward. In fact, sometimes it's a quiet step forward toward peace of mind. There, you don't have to worry about feeling unwell in the middle of the night. There are nurses on call, emergency buttons within reach, people who know you're there who will check on you if needed. You won't have to struggle with daily chores alone. There's help for that. Help that allows you to stay tidy, comfortable, without exhausting yourself. But more than the practical things, what may matter most in these places is the presence of others your age. You'll no longer feel like the only one lying awake through long nights, or the only one limping through another stiff morning. There are others, just like you, growing older, trying to live each day as meaningfully as they can. and they'll understand you without needing many words. You'll have shared meals, gentle exercise classes, afternoons filled with quiet conversations, and the subtle warmth of someone nodding and understanding as you pass them in the hallway. Sometimes that's all it takes to warm the heart again. Making the decision to move is never easy. It takes courage to admit that change might be necessary, but it also takes kindness toward yourself. To stop forcing yourself to carry the weight of silence in a house that no longer feels as alive. Peace doesn't always stay in the old place. Sometimes it waits for you in a new one where you're cared for, where people see you, where you can move through your days alongside others who understand what aging feels like. If you're still unsure, still considering, try talking with your children or someone you trust. Visit a few places, notice the atmosphere, talk to the people who live there, because only when you give yourself permission to open a new door can you realize how much lighter life can become. And if you've already made such a change from your old home to a place that now fits you, better consider sharing that experience below. Someone out there might be feeling lost, and your story could help them find their way forward. Because in the end, it's not about where we live, but how we live, who we live with, and whether we feel safe and seen in the space we call home. And when those pieces begin to fall into place, maybe that's also the moment when we can finally look back and start to truly appreciate every person and every memory that once passed through our lives. We'll gently explore that thought in the next part. There's something we begin to feel more clearly only when we've reached the later chapters of life. It's the weight of memory and the quiet comfort that comes from gratitude. Have you ever found yourself sitting still in the afternoon, suddenly remembering a laugh, a familiar hand you once held, or the gentle look from someone who is no longer here? They're gone now, but their image lingers like a film that never fades. And in that moment, your heart sinks, just a little. Not enough to make you cry, but enough to leave you still, a silence without a name. That is what old age feels like. Not just the quiet aches each morning, but the way our minds return again and again to the fragments of a life once lived. People say, live in the present. But for many older adults, the present is a mirror reflecting the past. The ones we loved have gone. The places that once held meaning now exist only in our memories. And the stories of yesterday were often the only ones left who still remember them clearly. And in the middle of it all, the heart can drift into regret. If only I had more time. If only they were still here, so I could finish the story I never got to tell. But then, there's something more important than sorrow. Gratitude. Gratitude for having once lived in love. Gratitude for having people worth missing, worth holding in memory, worth quietly revisiting when the house feels too still. Yes, you can remember. Yes, you can feel sorrow, but you can also smile when you think of the mornings someone brewed your coffee, the winter evenings when the kitchen filled with laughter, or the times you sat beside someone you loved, saying nothing at all because that silence was full of understanding. Gratitude doesn't erase the pain, but it softens it. It helps you look back on the past not with regret, but with kindness, as if your memories have returned like an old friend, not to haunt you, but to sit beside you for a while, quietly. And once you've learned to be at peace with what is past, you'll also know how to live more fully in the now. You may no longer be young. Your health may not be what it once was, but that doesn't mean your value has faded. You still have wisdom to share, an honest thought, a well-worn story, a reassuring look that says, you're not alone. There are still things to enjoy: a warm sunrise, an old melody, a meal you made yourself, or just sitting still, watching the leaves fall from your porch. Old age isn't a time to wait. It's not a time to hide. It's a time to be true to yourself. You don't need to rush. You don't need to prove anything anymore. Live slowly but meaningfully. Live deeply but gently. Live in a way that helps you understand yourself more and makes peace with all that wasn't perfect. And if you're carrying a quiet longing in your heart, something left unsaid, try writing it down or share it with someone who'll listen, because sometimes speaking it aloud can be its own form of healing. And if you've made it through loss by leaning on gratitude, I invite you to leave a few words below. Your story might be the warmth someone else needs today, someone quietly listening now, just as you once were. After everything, perhaps what matters most is not how long we live, but how we've lived. And if you wake up each morning still feeling grateful for even one small thing, then you, my friend, are living a beautiful life. Until we meet again in the next video, where we'll continue side by side in quiet companionship, in gentle love, and in this slow, honest, meaningful journey we share together. If you're still here, still sitting with me through these final moments, I believe there's something simple and quiet in your heart, a wish to keep going, to continue living in the most peaceful, fulfilling way that old age can offer. We can't control everything that happens in life, but we can always choose how we meet it. Even when we're alone, even when something deep inside still aches, unsaid. As long as you're still listening to your own heart, as long as you're still noticing the little things each day, you are already living a meaningful life. If what you've just heard made your heart feel a little heavier or brought to mind a friend, someone who's also living quietly in a familiar room somewhere, maybe now is the time to share this video with them. No need for long messages, no need to explain. Just let it say, I understand, and I'm still here. And if you find yourself slowing down lately, not because you're tired, but because you want to live more deeply, more mindfully, consider leaving a comment below with the words, "At peace," a quiet promise that you'll keep walking forward gently, but never giving up. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. And until we meet again in the next video, I'll be right here, waiting so we can sit together once more, like old friends, sharing quiet reflections in a world that never seems to slow down.